My father raised his glass and laughed at my janitor uniform, humiliating me in front of the entire family. He said I was nothing. I walked out without a word, started my own company, and waited for the day he'd come begging for a job. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The crystal wine glass chimed against the silver spoon, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the low murmur of conversation in the dining room. It was the sound of authority, the sound my father, Robert, used when he wanted to command a room. It was a sound I had grown up fearing, respecting, and eventually dreading. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I was trying to hide them. Despite the scrubbing I had done before coming over, the faint, acrid smell of industrial bleach seemed to cling to my skin. My cuticles were ragged, the skin around my knuckles dry and cracking from exposure to harsh chemicals. I was 26 years old, and I was exhausted. My back ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm. A souvenir from an 8-hour shift, buffing the floors of the local high school, before rushing here for Thanksgiving dinner. The room was warm, smelling of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and expensive cologne. It was a stark contrast to the cold, antiseptic smell of the janitor's closet where I spent my nights. Around me, my family sat in their finest clothes. My brothers, Miles and Tristan, looked like they had stepped out of a catalog for young, successful professionals. Miles, the investment banker, was adjusting the cuffs of his tailored shirt, while Tristan, the corporate lawyer, was laughing at something his wife was whispering. They were the pride of the family, the golden boys, the ones who had followed the path Robert had laid out for them: elite universities, high-powered corporate jobs, 6-figure salaries right out of the gate. And then there was me, Stephanie, the disappointment. "Attention, everyone," Robert boomed, his voice deep and resonant. He stood at the head of the table, a glass of vintage Cabernet in his hand. His face was flushed, partly from the heat of the room, but mostly from the wine he'd been drinking since noon. He looked powerful, successful, the very image of a retired executive who had conquered the world. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. My mother offered a nervous, tight-lipped smile. She knew his moods better than anyone, and she knew that his humor often came with a serrated edge. "I just want to say," Robert began, swaying slightly, "how proud I am of this family. We have achieved so much this year." He gestured grandly toward Miles. "Miles, closing that merger deal. Phenomenal work, son. You're a shark, just like I was." Miles grinned, raising his glass. "Thanks, Dad." "And Tristan," Robert continued, pivoting to my other brother. "Making partner at the firm before 30, that is efficiency, that is brilliance." "Cheers, Dad," Tristan said, clinking glasses with Miles. I kept my head down, staring at the intricate patterns on the fine china plate. I just wanted this to be over. I wanted to eat quickly and go home to my small, drafty apartment so I could sleep before my next shift started at 4:00 a.m. "But," Robert said, his voice dropping an octave, a smirk curling the corner of his lip. He wasn't done. The air in the room seemed to suck out, leaving a vacuum of tension. "We have to be thankful for everyone, don't we? Even the ones who took the scenic route." My stomach dropped. "Please," I begged silently, "just let it go, just for today." Robert turned his gaze toward me. It wasn't a look of fatherly love. It was a look of amusement, bordering on disdain. "To Stephanie," he announced, his voice booming. I looked up, my face burning. "To the kids who made something of themselves," he shouted, raising his glass higher, "and didn't end up cleaning toilets for a living." The silence that followed was deafening. For a split second, I thought someone might defend me. I thought my mother might tell him that was enough, or that Miles or Tristan might say, "Come on, Dad, that's not cool." Instead, Miles snorted, a short, sharp sound of suppressed laughter. Then Tristan chuckled. And then, like a dam breaking, the table erupted. My father threw his head back and laughed the hardest, pleased with his own wit. They were laughing at my hands. They were laughing at my uniform that hung in the closet. They were laughing at the fact that while they moved millions of dollars around on spreadsheets, I moved trash bags. I felt the tears pricking the back of my eyes, hot and stinging. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I had taken this job to pay off my own student loans because Robert had refused to help me when I chose a stat. E-college over his Ivy League alma mater. I was working double shifts. I was honest. I was hardworking. But to him, I was a punchline. The betrayal wasn't just in the words, it was in the laughter of my brothers. The people I had played with, the people I had defended on the playground. They looked at me now not as a sister, but as a failure. I didn't scream, I didn't flip the table. I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. The laughter died down, replaced by a sudden, confused silence. "Stephanie," my mother whispered, her eyes wide. I looked at Robert. He was still smiling, though it had faltered slightly. He looked waiting for me to apologize for ruining the mood. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked out of the dining room, through the foyer, and out the heavy oak front door. As I stepped into the cool November night, I heard my father's voice drift out one last time. "Oh, let her go. She's probably got a shift to get to. Someone's got to scrub the bowls." The door clicked shut behind me. That click was the most definitive sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a bridge burning, collapsing into the river below. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis of poverty itself. It was the diagnosis of worthlessness from the man who was supposed to be my hero. The rain started halfway through the drive home, a cold, miserable drizzle that turned the streetlights into blurred streaks of yellow and red on my windshield. My car, a rusted 10-year-old sedan that smelled faintly of mildew, rattled as I pushed it over 40 miles per hour. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. I could still hear the laughter. It echoed in the small cabin of the car, bouncing off the dashboard, louder than the rain drumming on the roof. To the kids who made something of themselves. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex. It was a grim collection of brick buildings on the edge of town, where the streetlights flickered and the dumpsters were always overflowing. I parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there in the dark. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from Miles. "Don't be so sensitive, Steph. Dad was just joking. Come back and have pie." I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the tears that were finally spilling over my cheeks. Joking. It was always a joke when they hurt you. If you reacted, you were crazy. If you cried, you were weak. I deleted the text, then I blocked the number. I went upstairs to my apartment. It was a studio, barely big enough for a bed and a kitchenette. I sat on the edge of the mattress, still in my nice clothes, a dress I had bought at a thrift store specifically for this dinner. I looked at my hands again. They were rough. They were calloused. They were the hands of a janitor. But as I sat there, listening to the radiator clank and hiss, something shifted inside me. The shame that had been burning in my chest began to cool, hardening into something else. Something colder, something stronger. Robert saw a janitor. He saw someone who cleaned toilets. He saw the bottom of the hierarchy. But I saw something he didn't. Every night while I cleaned the high school and the local office buildings I had started picking up shifts at, I saw how things worked. I saw the waste. I saw the inefficiency. I saw how the cleaning crews were managed poorly, how supplies were squandered, how contracts were negotiated by people who had never held a mop in their lives. I wasn't just cleaning. I was observing. I was learning the logistics of facility management from the ground floor up. I knew exactly how long it took to sanitize 1,000 square feet. I knew the margins on industrial solvent. I knew that the company I worked for was overcharging and underdelivering, and that the clients were unhappy. I stood up and walked to the small, wobbly desk in the corner of the room. I opened my laptop. It was slow and the screen was cracked in the corner, but it worked. I opened a new document. I didn't title it Resume. I titled it Summit Facility Management Business Plan. My father had mocked me for being at the bottom. He didn't realize that the bottom is the only place where you can see exactly how the foundation is built. He thought he had crushed me with that toast. He thought he had put me in my place. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. Dirt is only permanent if you don't know how to remove it. And I was an expert at removal. I typed through the night. I didn't sleep. By the time the sun came up, painting the sky a bruised purple, I had a roadmap. It would take years. It would take every ounce of energy I had. I would have to eat ramen noodles and work 80-hour weeks. I would have to sacrifice my social life, my sleep, and my sanity. But I wasn't doing it for the money. Not anymore. I looked at my phone again. No more messages. They had given up on me. Good. Enjoy your pie, Dad, I whispered to the empty room, because the bill is coming. The next 5 years were a blur of exhaustion and grit. I didn't just work as a janitor. I became the best janitor the city had ever seen. Then I became a supervisor. Then, with a small business loan that I had to fight tooth and nail to get, using my beat-up car as collateral, I started Summit Cleaning Services. It started with me and 2 other women, Maria and Linda, scrubbing floors in small dental offices at 2:00 a.m. Maria was a force of nature, a woman in her 40s who had been overlooked by every other employer because of her broken English. But I saw her attention to detail. I saw her loyalty. I made her my second-in-command immediately. We didn't just clean, we managed. We fixed leaky faucets before the owners knew they were leaking. We organized supply closets. We made ourselves indispensable. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on the family. Not through direct contact, I had maintained total radio silence, but through the grapevine of the city's business news. Robert was still riding high, or so it seemed. He had retired from his executive role, but had set himself up as a consultant and investor. He was frequently featured in the local business journal, usually photographed at galas or charity golf tournaments. The articles always described him in glowing terms: Robert the visionary, Robert the titan of industry. But reading between the lines, I saw cracks. There were rumors of failed investments, a venture into a tech startup that went belly up, a real estate deal in Florida that was tied up in litigation. Robert was a man who believed his own hype. He thought his success was due to innate genius, not the booming economy he had been lucky enough to ride during his peak years. He was arrogant, reckless with his capital, and surrounded by yes-men. Including my brothers. Miles and Tristan were still in his orbit, likely feeding his ego to keep their spots in the will secure. They were doing well, sure, but they lacked the hunger. They had never been hungry. They had never had to choose between gas for the car and dinner. One afternoon, about 7 years after the Thanksgiving incident, I was meeting with a potential client, a large commercial property manager. We were in a coffee shop downtown. As I was reviewing the contract, I saw him, Robert. He was sitting 3 tables away, meeting with a younger man who looked terrified. Robert was older now, his hair completely white, his face a bit puffier. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive but dated, the cut from a decade ago. I froze, holding my breath. I was wearing a sharp navy blazer, my hair cut in a professional bob. I looked nothing like the girl in the janitor's uniform. I listened, I couldn't help it. "You don't understand the market, son," Robert was saying, his voice loud enough to carry. He was lecturing the young man. "You have to be aggressive, you have to crush the competition. It's not about ethics or sustainability. It's about the bottom line. That's why I'm rich and you're begging for funding." The young man looked down at his lap. "But sir, the environmental regulations." "Regulations are suggestions?" Robert scoffed. He waved a hand dismissively, accidentally knocking a spoon off the table. He didn't even look down. He just snapped his fingers at a passing waitress. "Sweetheart, get that, will you?" He didn't say please. He didn't make eye contact. He treated the waitress exactly how he had treated me. To him, she was invisible furniture. The waitress, a young girl who looked exhausted, bent down to pick it up. "And bring me more coffee," Robert barked at her back. "This swill is cold." My blood boiled. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to walk over there and pour the cold coffee into his lap, but I stopped myself. Maria, who was sitting next to me reviewing the numbers, put a hand on my arm. She followed my gaze, saw the man, and then looked back at me. She knew the story. "Not yet, boss," she whispered. "Not yet." She was right. I wasn't ready. Summit was growing, but we weren't giants yet. I needed to be undeniable. I needed to be so big that when I finally cast my shadow, it would eclipse him completely. I watched my father berate the young entrepreneur for another 10 minutes, bragging about his assets, his vacation home, his genius. He mentioned Miles and Tristan, dropping their job titles like trophies. "My sons are killers," Robert said. "They run this town." He didn't mention a daughter. To him, I didn't exist. I had been erased because I didn't fit the narrative of his success. I turned back to my client, signed the contract with a steady hand, and smiled. "Let's get to work," I said to Maria. That day, we landed our first skyscraper. 12 years, that's how long it had been since the toast. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my corner office, looking out over the city skyline. Tea was raining again, just like that night I drove away in my rusted sedan, but the view was different now. I was on the 45th floor of the Meridian Tower. The rain wasn't a miserable drizzle blurring my vision. It was a distant, atmospheric backdrop to the empire I had built. Summit Facility Management was no longer a startup. We were the premier logistics and maintenance firm in the tri-state area. We held contracts for hospitals, universities, and corporate headquarters. I had 400 employees. I had a driver. I had a reputation for being tough, fair, and obsessively detailed. My office was a sanctuary of cool grays and warm wood tones. No clutter. Everything had a place. It was the antithesis of the chaotic, dirty world I had started in. There was a soft knock on the door. "Come in, Maria," I said without turning around. Maria, now my VP of operations, walked in. She was wearing a tailored cream suit, a far cry from the blue coveralls we used to wear. She held a tablet in her hand, her expression unreadable. "We have the shortlist for the Regional Operations Manager position," she said, placing the tablet on my desk. "The interview slots for Friday are filled, but there's one applicant I think you need to see personally." I turned around, brow furrowed. Why did I know them? "You could say that," Maria said quietly. I walked over to the desk and picked up the tablet. I scrolled past the first few names, young MBAs, seasoned logistics directors. Then, at the bottom of the pending review pile, my finger froze. Applicant Robert Sterling. Objective, senior management/consultant role. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, violent rhythm that took me back to that dining room instantly. I stared at the name. Robert, my father. "He applied?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Here, does he know?" "No," Maria said, shaking her head. "We rebranded as SFM Global on the job boards to filter out local bias. He thinks he's applying to an international conglomerate based out of Zurich. He has no idea Stephanie Sterling is the CEO." I sank into my leather chair, the leather creaking softly. Why is he applying for a job? He's retired. He's supposed to be sitting on a yacht in the Keys. I looked closer at the resume. It was padded with fluff. Independent consultant. Private equity advisor. But there were gaps. Large, glaring gaps in the last 3 years. And the address listed? It wasn't the sprawling estate in the suburbs where I grew up. It was an apartment complex on the south side. A decent place, but not where a titan of industry lived. "He's desperate," I said, realizing it as I spoke. "He's not just looking for something to do, he needs money." I looked up at Maria. The old anger flared, but it was different now. It was cold, calculated. "Do not reject him," I said. Maria raised an eyebrow. "You want to interview him?" "I want to know the truth," I corrected. If he's applying for a mid-level manager role, a job that requires actual work, something has gone strictly wrong. I want a full background check. Financials, credit score, property records, everything. I'll have the pie on it within the hour, Maria said, making a note. And the interview. Schedule him for Friday, I said, leaning back and tenting my fingers. Last slot of the day, 4:00 p.m. Who should conduct it? I will, I said, but don't put my name on the schedule, just put CEO. Maria nodded slowly, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. He's going to walk right into the lion's den. No, I corrected her, turning back to the window. He's walking into the janitor's closet. He just doesn't know it yet. By the next afternoon, the report was on my desk. It was a thick manila envelope, and its contents were damning. The pie had been thorough. Robert wasn't just broke, he was underwater. The visionary investments he had bragged about had all imploded. He had leveraged the family home to cover margin calls on a risky tech venture that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. The house had been foreclosed on 6 months ago, quietly. He had managed to keep it out of the papers, likely out of sheer pride. But the most interesting detail was a line item regarding a family trust. The trust that was supposed to hold the inheritances for Miles and Tristan. It was empty, drained 3 years ago to pay off a lawsuit from a former partner who accused Robert of fraud. My brothers didn't know. I was sure of it. If Miles knew his inheritance was gone, he wouldn't be posting photos of golf trips on social media. I held the trap in my hands. It wasn't just a job interview anymore. It was an autopsy of his lies. Friday afternoon arrived with a heavy gray sky. The atmosphere in the office was subdued as the weekend approached, but inside my chest, a storm was raging. I watched the security feed on my second monitor. At 3:45 p.m., Robert walked into the lobby. He looked older, much older, his height was thinning and his posture, once aggressively upright, was slumped. He was wearing a suit I recognized, a charcoal Armani he must have bought 15 years ago. It was well maintained, but the cut was dated, the lapels too wide for current fashion. He was carrying a leather briefcase that looked scuffed. He approached the receptionist, Sarah. I turned up the volume on the feed. Robert Sterling, he announced. The arrogance was still there, masked by a thin veneer of politeness. Here to see the CEO. I have a 4:00 p.m. Please take a seat, Mr. Sterling, Sarah said kindly. She will be with you shortly. I see. I saw Robert blink. He clearly expected a he. He adjusted his tie, looking around the lobby. He checked his watch 3 times in 2 minutes. He pulled out a handkerchief and dabbed his forehead. He was nervous. The shark was sweating. At 4:00 p.m. exactly, I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked to the mirror and checked my face. I didn't look like the girl with the red, chapped hands anymore. I looked like power. I walked out of my office, down the long corridor, and signaled to Maria. She opened the double glass doors to the waiting area. Mr. Sterling, Maria called out, the CEO will see you now. Robert stood up, forcing a bright, salesman smile. He picked up his briefcase, threw his shoulders back, and marched toward the conference room. He didn't look at Maria. He walked past her as if she were a coat rack. I was standing at the head of the long conference table, my back to him, looking out the window. Good afternoon, Robert said, his voice projecting that fake executive confidence. Robert Sterling, a pleasure to meet you. I must say, impressive operation you have here. I waited 3 seconds, then I turned around. Hello, Dad. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical weight in the room. Robert's smile froze. His eyes widened, then squinted, then widened again as his brain tried to process the visual information. He looked at me, then at the door, then back at me. He looked at the nameplate on the desk. Stephanie Sterling, CEO. Stephanie, he croaked. The booming voice was gone. Please, I said, gesturing to the chair at the opposite end of the table. Sit down, we have a lot to cover. He didn't move. I don't understand. Is this a joke? Is Miles putting you up to this? Sit down, I said again. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the steel of 1,000 negotiations in it. He sat, he collapsed into the chair really. He looked small. You applied for the operations manager position, I said, picking up his resume. I've reviewed your file, it's creative. Robert's face went red. The shock was turning into defensiveness. I am a consultant. I am looking for a strategic partnership. I saw this firm was expanding and thought I could offer my expertise. You're looking for a job, I corrected him. A mid-level job, salary range 80 to 90,000, reporting to a woman named Maria who you just walked past without acknowledging. Now listen here, Robert snapped, his old anger surfacing. He pointed a finger at me. I don't know how you tricked someone into giving you this title or who you married to get this office, but you show me some respect. I am your father. I didn't marry anyone, I said calmly. I built this, from the ground up. While you were laughing at me for cleaning toilets, I was learning how to run the companies that own the toilets. You were a janitor, he spat the word like a curse. And you were a fraud, I replied. I slid the manila envelope across the long table. It stopped inches from his hands. What is this? He asked. That is your financial reality, I said. Foreclosure, 3 failed ventures, a lawsuit settled out of court for breach of fiduciary duty, and most interestingly, the liquidation of the Sterling Family Trust. Robert went pale. That is private information. It's due diligence, I said. You wanted a job in my finance department. I had to check if you were a risk. Turns out you're a liability. He stood up, his hands shaking. You ungrateful little, I raised you. I put a roof over your head. And then you kicked me out of it emotionally because I didn't fit your image, I said. You mocked me to elevate Miles and Tristan. You toasted to my failure. It was a joke, he shouted. Can't you take a joke? The punchline wasn't funny then, I said, leaning forward. And it's certainly not funny now that you're sitting in my office, broke, asking the janitor for a paycheck. Robert stared at me. He looked like he wanted to hit me. He looked like he wanted to cry. I don't need this, he sneered, grabbing his briefcase. I have other offers, real offers. I just came here to see what the competition looked like. You have no offers, Robert, I said softly. You're 65, your reputation in the city is mud. You burned your network. This was your last shot. He stopped. Pet at the door, he didn't turn around. You think you're so smart, he muttered. Wait until your brothers hear about this. They won't let you treat me like this. Please, I said, picking up my phone. Call them, tell them everything. He slammed the door as he left. I knew the call would come. Robert was a master manipulator. He wouldn't tell them the truth. He would spin a story where he was the victim, the aging father reaching out to his estranged daughter, only to be cruelly mocked and rejected. Sure enough, 2 hours later, my personal cell phone rang. It was Miles. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I had kept the number unblocked, waiting for this moment. Hello, Miles, I answered, putting the phone on speaker and setting it on my marble desk. What the hell is wrong with you? Miles didn't say hello. His voice was tight with righteous indignation. Dad just called me. He was practically hyperventilating. He said he came to your office to try and make peace, to offer some consulting advice, and you humiliated him. You had security escort him out. He didn't come to make peace, Miles, I said calmly, typing on my keyboard. He came for a job interview. He's broke. Bullshit, Miles scoffed. Dad's fine. He's just shifting assets. He told us he's moving into liquid capital. And even if he was looking for work, you don't treat family like that. You've always been so bitter, Stephanie, just because you didn't cut it in the corporate world. I own the corporate world, Miles, I interrupted. I'm the CEO of the company he applied to. Look up SFM Global. That's me. There was a pause on the line. I could hear him typing. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Summit, wait, your summit. Yes. Okay, so you got lucky, Miles pivoted, his voice changing but still condescending. So you have a company, that's great. But that doesn't give you the right to abuse Dad. He's an old man, he's fragile. He's a liar, I said, and he's been lying to you too. Don't start with your conspiracy theories, Miles snapped. Dad has always taken care of us, the trust fund. Check the trust, Miles, I said. What? The Sterling Family Trust. The one Mom set up before she passed, the one Dad manages. When was the last time you saw a statement? A real bank statement, not just an Excel spreadsheet he emailed you. I get statements every quarter, Miles stammered, but I heard the doubt creeping in. Check the account number, I pressed. I'm sending you an email right now. It contains the public records of the lawsuit Dad settled 3 years ago. He was sued by his partners for embezzlement. He used the trust fund to pay the settlement. I hit send. I just sent it to you and Tristan, I said. You're lying, Miles said, but his voice was weak. Read it, I commanded. And then ask yourself why this successful executive was applying for an operations manager job at a janitorial company. I heard the ping of the email, arriving on his end. I'm opening it, Miles muttered. Silence stretched for a long minute. All I could hear was his breathing, getting faster and shallower. Oh my God, he whispered. What? I asked, though I knew. The dates, Miles said, his voice trembling. He withdrew $200,000 on the same day he told me the market was down and we shouldn't touch the principal. He emptied it. It's all gone. Tristan's law school loans, I asked. He said he paid them off with the fund, Miles said, panic rising. Tristan thinks he's debt-free. He's not, I said mercilessly. Dad pocketed the money. Tristan is likely defaulting on loans he doesn't know exist. I have to go, Miles said abruptly. I have to call Tristan, I have to call Dad. Do that, I said, and Miles. What? He sounded broken. Next time you want to toast to the kids who made something of themselves, I said, make sure you actually check the bank account first. I hung up. The sun had gone down. My office was dark, lit only by the city lights below. I walked over to the window again. The first confrontation was over. I had exposed him to myself. The second confrontation was over. I had exposed him to his sons. But it wasn't finished. Robert was cornered, and cornered animals bite. He wouldn't just go away. He would try to save face. He would try to publicly discredit me to save his own ego. He had a gala coming up, the Business Leaders of Tomorrow charity dinner. He was being honored as a legacy member. I knew he would be there, and I knew he would try to spin the narrative one last time. I picked up the phone and dialed Maria. Get me a table at the Business Leaders Gala on Saturday, I said. Front row. You want to go? Maria asked, surprised. You hate those things. I'm not going to eat, I said. I'm going to finish it. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a cavern of gold leaf, crystal chandeliers, and the suffocating scent of expensive lilies. It was the Business Leaders of Tomorrow annual gala, the biggest night on the city's corporate calendar. Tickets were $5,000 a plate. I walked in at 7:00 p.m. sharp. I wasn't wearing a pantsuit tonight. I was wearing a floor-length gown of emerald silk that draped over my frame like liquid armor. My hair was swept up, exposing the diamond studs in my ears. I didn't look like a facility manager. I didn't look like a janitor. I looked like the owner of the building. The room was buzzing with the low, steady hum of networking. I saw them immediately. The old guard. The men who had controlled this city for decades, sipping scotch and patting each other on the back. And in the center of them, holding court, was Robert. He looked haggard. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the strain around his eyes, the way his hands shook slightly as he held his drink. But he was fighting it. He was laughing too loudly, gesturing too broadly. He was trying to project the image of the Titan one last time. Miles and Tristan were there, too. They stood slightly behind him, looking like ghosts. Their faces were pale, their eyes darting around the room nervously. They knew. The email I had sent them yesterday had clearly detonated their world, but they were here, likely coerced by Robert to keep up appearances for one final night. I moved through the crowd. Heads turned. Whispers started. People recognized me now. The industry press had done a profile on Summit Global last month, calling me the logistics queen. I saw recognition dawn on faces that used to look through me. I didn't approach my family. I walked to table 4, front and center, where Maria was waiting. I sat down, unfolded my napkin, and stared directly at Robert. He felt it. He turned, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he hardened his expression. He turned his back to me. The dinner began, speeches were made, awards were handed out, and then it was time for the legacy address, given by a senior member of the business community. This year, it was Robert. He walked up to the podium. The applause was polite but thin. People knew rumors. In this town, money talks but debt screams. "Thank you," Robert said, gripping the podium with white-knuckled hands. "It is an honor to stand here tonight among friends, among family." He looked at Miles and Tristan, who stared at the tablecloth. "We live in a changing world," Robert continued, his voice gaining some of its old theatrical strength. "A world where values seem to be eroding. Hard work, loyalty, respect for one's elders. These things seem to be forgotten by the younger generation." He paused for effect, his eyes flicked to me. "Some of us build legacies," he said, his tone sharpening, "and some simply take. Some are ungrateful. I have spent my life building a foundation for my children. I have sacrificed. I have given everything. And it breaks a father's heart when that sacrifice is met with a disdain." The room went quiet. This was getting personal. It was awkward. "But," Robert said, forcing a smile, "I am proud of my sons, Miles, Tristan. They understand what it means to carry the torch. They understand that success isn't just about money, it's about character. It's about class. It's not about doing the dirty work." He couldn't help himself. He just had to twist the knife one last time. Dirty work. I saw Miles flinch. Robert raised his glass. "So here's to the legacy, to the ones who deserve it." Actually, a voice rang out. It wasn't me. The entire room turned. Miles stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He looked terrified, shaking like a leaf, but he was standing. "Miles," Robert said, a nervous chuckle escaping him. "Sit down, son. Save the applause for the end." "There is no legacy, Dad," Miles said. His voice cracked, then found strength. "It's gone." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. "Excuse me," Robert hissed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "This is not the time." "You stole it," Tristan stood up next to him. Tristan, the lawyer, the one who never broke protocol, he looked furious. "The trust, Mom's money, you stole it all to cover your fraud." "Security," Robert shouted into the microphone, panic taking over. "Get them out, they're drunk." "We aren't drunk," Miles shouted, pointing a trembling finger at his father. "And we aren't ungrateful. We just finally checked the accounts. You emptied the trust 3 years ago, you lied to us about the loans, you lied about the house." The crowd gasped. The whispers exploded into a roar. This wasn't just a scene, it was a public execution of a reputation. Robert looked around wildly. He looked for an ally. He looked at the crowd, but all he saw were phones being raised, recording the meltdown. He looked at his friends, but they were averting their gaze. Then he looked at me. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. I wasn't smiling, I wasn't laughing, I was just witnessing. "Stephanie," Robert shouted, pointing at me from the stage. Tell them you put them up to this. You're jealous. You've always been jealous because you were scrubbing floors while we were building empires." The spotlight swung to me. 300 people turned to look at the woman in the emerald dress. I stood up slowly. I didn't need a microphone. I had trained my voice in warehouses and construction sites. It carried. "I wasn't jealous, Robert," I said, my voice calm, cool, and devastatingly clear. "I was busy." "Busy doing what?" he sneered, desperate to lower my status to make me small again. Cleaning toilets. Busy buying your debt, I said. The room went deathly silent again. What? Robert whispered. The foreclosure on the family estate, I said, walking slowly toward the stage. The bank auctioned the debt last week. I bought it. The commercial building where your consulting firm rents space. I acquired that management contract 3 months ago. I stopped at the foot of the stage. I looked up at him. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff that had already crumbled. You don't have a legacy, Dad, I said, loud enough for the back row to hear. You have a landlord, and her name is Stephanie. Robert stepped back. He gripped his chest. He looked at Miles and Tristan, who were staring at me in shock. He looked at the crowd, who were staring at him with a mix of pity and disgust. He opened his mouth to speak, to yell, to spin another lie, but nothing came out. The illusion was gone. The Titan was just an old man in a cheap suit who had stolen from his children and mocked the only one who could have saved him. He slumped against the podium, defeated. I turned to my brothers. Get him out of here, I said quietly, before the police arrive for the fraud charges. I turned around and walked back to my table. I signaled the waiter. I'll have the champagne now, I said. The fallout was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, Robert Sterling was a pariah. The video of the gala had circulated through the business community within hours. The legacy speech became a meme, a cautionary tale of hubris. He didn't go to jail. Miles and Tristan decided not to press charges for the theft of the trust, mostly to spare the family name any further humiliation. But his life, as he knew it, was over. He was forced into bankruptcy. The country club membership was revoked. The friends he had spent decades impressing stopped returning his calls. He moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Ironically, it was in a complex managed by one of my competitors. I didn't evict him from the house immediately. I gave him 30 days to vacate, which was more grace than he had ever shown me. 2 weeks after the gala, my assistant buzzed me. Your brothers are here, Maria said. Send them in. Miles and Tristan walked into my office. They looked different, humbled. The arrogance that had coated them like a second skin was gone, scrubbed away by the harsh reality of their financial situation. Miles had lost his safety net. Tristan was facing student loan debt he hadn't known existed. They stood awkwardly by the door. Come in, I said, gesturing to the chairs. I have coffee. They sat. They looked around the office, taking in the view, the awards on the shelf, the quiet hum of a massive operation running smoothly. Nice place, Tristan said quietly. It works, I said. Steph, Miles began, then stopped. He rubbed his face. Look, we wanted to apologize for everything, for the Thanksgiving dinner, for the years of silence. We didn't know, Tristan added, about the money, about how bad he was. You knew how he treated me, I said gently. You didn't need a bank statement to see that. They flinched. They knew I was right. We were cowards, Miles admitted, looking down at his hands. He convinced us that you were the failure, that if we associated with you, we'd catch it. It was easier to laugh than to stand up to him. It usually is, I said. I opened a drawer and pulled out 2 thick envelopes. I slid one to Miles and one to Tristan. What's this? Miles asked. Job offers, I said. They stared at me. I'm not giving you money, I said firmly. I'm not Dad. I don't believe in handouts, but I believe in work. Summit is expanding. Miles, I need a CFO who actually understands numbers and isn't cooking the books. Tristan, I need in-house counsel to handle compliance and labor contracts. Miles opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the salary. It wasn't what he was making as a banker, but it was solid. It was real. You'd hire us, Tristan asked, incredulous, after we laughed at you. I'm hiring you because you're qualified, I said, and because you're family, but let's be clear about one thing. I leaned forward, my gaze locking with TH. Ayers. In this company, we respect the work. Every part of it, from the CEO to the night shift janitor. If I ever hear either of you mock someone for getting their hands dirty, you're fired. Immediately. Do you understand? Miles swallowed hard. He nodded. I understand. Me too, Tristan said. Good, I said, standing up. Report to HR on Monday. Start time is 8:00 a.m. Don't be late. They left, looking dazed but relieved. They had a second chance. I walked over to the window one last time. I thought about Robert, sitting alone in his small apartment. I wondered if he finally understood. He had spent his life trying to be clean. He thought status was about separation from the dirt. He thought that by wearing a suit and looking down on people, he was elevating himself. He was wrong. Real power isn't about avoiding the mess. It's about having the strength to clean it up. I looked down at my hands. They were manicured now, soft and smooth. But underneath the skin, the muscles were the same. They were the hands that had scrubbed toilets. They were the hands that had built a skyscraper. And they were the hands that had finally, after 12 long years, wiped the slate clean.